Hi, this is my review of Old School Tactical. This is Volume 2, so it's the Western Front 1944 to 45. It is a Shane Logan design. Shane, I think, did pretty much all the artwork as well, and is published by Flying Pig Games. If we have a look at the back of the box, and the box itself is massive. It is a massive game with a huge amount of content. This game introduces the Americans to the series. So the first game was the Eastern Front, this game Western Front, and it's pretty exclusively, I'll say, Americans versus the different German Axis forces that you'll be fighting against. It is a World War II squad level tactical game. This introduces quite a few new additions to that, and we'll have a look at some of the counters that you get. But in particular, there's quite a few different pieces of armour as well. The game comes with it is a huge mounted game board, and we'll have a look at that again later, plus loads of counters and cards and things like that. Interestingly, playing time 45 minutes to 5 hours. Definitely would agree that some of the shorter scenarios you can set up and play comfortably in an hour, and even when you're learning the game system, some of those shorter scenarios don't take too long to play, and there are quite a few scenarios that have a lot more components, a lot more counters, that will take a lot longer to play. So in a way, it is a game that scales very well to the amount of time that you would like to play through a scenario. It is a two-player game, and I'll talk more about this, about playing the game solo. I've played the game solo extensively, and I've played it two players. And I think with a bit of tweaking, you could probably play it. You could probably play more than two players for that matter. But it's not a specific solitaire game. Neither does it have a specific solitaire mode or anything like that. But like I said, I think it solos incredibly well. So first up, we'll have a look at the rulebook. As with all the games in the series, I really do like Shane Logan's artwork. It's a great piece. I think this is an M10 on the cover. One of my particular favourite tank destroyers from World War II. I think a lot of his artwork and presentation has that sort of realistic but slightly lived-in feel, but it's quite visually very appealing. I do very much like it. In terms of the actual rulebook itself, looks to be about 22 pages. Doesn't take a huge amount of time to go through, compared to and it's very difficult when you're sort of talking about squad level tactical games not to compare them, so I'm going to try very hard not to do that, but it certainly is a game that you can go through the rulebook in a couple of evenings. You don't need to go through every single thing before you can start playing. I like to learn by getting the rulebook, reading through the rulebook, get some counters out and playing, and just trying some of the different mechanics. The one thing I do like about this rulebook is very well laid out. This is the rulebook I have is version 5.5. There could well be a more recent version than the one I have. But even with this version, it's been iterated on over time. And you do get a good strong sense of that this is a game system that is constantly being improved in terms of how it explains the core mechanics of the game. And it does a very good job of explaining the core mechanics. There are some mechanics that I would go out on a limb and say are quite unique to this game that I particularly enjoy, and it does a very good job of explaining. So here you can see, for example, it's explaining the different counters. It details all the metrics on the counters that you'll be using, and they're very clear. And we'll have a look at the counters themselves. So, for example, crude weapons. Then we talk about armor or vehicles. So the orientation of the vehicle in the hex is really important. And again, it talks you through all of those. I have generally found the rulebook very accessible, very straightforward to read, does a very good job of getting to the point in explaining the mechanics, and, which is always important to me, very good reference for when I'm actually playing the game. And I go, oh, how does that work again? I've always had no problems finding the rules, finding the things that I've wanted to find very quickly. I would describe the game, I'll go on a limb here and say, for me, this is medium level complexity for tactical World War II squad based and vehicle based game. I had no problems. If you're, let me put it another way, if you're familiar with a lot of these types of games, you'll have no problems getting to grips with the mechanics at all. If you're completely new, I think I would recommend this to someone who's completely new to tactical hex-based war games, because I think the quality of the components, which I'll talk about later, but in terms of the rule set, the way the rule book is written is very straightforward. So one of the things that's unique about this game, one of the things I love about the game, is the impulse system, and I'll talk about that when we get some counters out on the board. Effectively, it's a more fluid system where you're moving or activating a couple of units, and by units I mean counters, and then your opponent is doing the same thing, then it's back to you to do the same thing, and so forth. I do really like the system. The morale system also is excellent, and again it talks you through that. So overall, rulebook, very nicely laid out, very clear, very concise, very easy to reference. So you can see, for example, here, if you're like, oh, how does the rally work? You just go straight to that section there. There's a nice index at the beginning of the game, or the rulebook, sorry, and so far very well laid out. A joy, I think, a good example for me of a good wargaming rulebook. And there are, maybe if I was giving some constructive feedback to Shane and to the publisher, what I would say is more examples of play would be beneficial. I think not so much for, I mean, I like the way I learned, it wasn't, I didn't need it, but I could see how some people would really benefit from that. So yeah, overall, an excellent rule book, well thumbed through this one, and a good quality, a very good quality production on the rulebook as well. So the scenario book, one of the things I love about this game is the amount of scenarios that you get. On the back here we have a contents page for the scenarios. So you've got 16 scenarios, and you get a couple of bonus scenarios as well. Each of the scenarios follows a similar format. So for example here, it tells you the forces for both sides, what turns they enter on, the number of turns, the section of the map that you'll be playing on. So this is a unique game in that, well, not unique, but it's very rare you see this in war games where you're not playing on the whole map, and this is the case that you have a large map and you're playing on a section of that map. And we'll have a look at that when we get the map out. So it tells you where on the map you will be playing, any victory conditions, any special rules, and the special rules varies from scenario to scenario. They do give a thematic feel to the scenario that I really enjoyed. Some of the scenarios are infantry only. So for example, both of these are just purely infantry, he says, yes. Some of them have squads, and but most of them have squads and additional sort of what I would class as sort of medium weapons or light machine guns and things like that. For example, this one here has a grenade bundle, for example, and you get a counter for those. Some of them will have the different armour that the game includes, so vehicles, so tanks, he'll say, things like that. And again, just the sheer number of scenarios that you get. As I said, some of them are quite play. You can play, set them up and comfortably play them in an hour or just over an hour, and some of them, much longer experience. What I do is I keep a track of all the scenarios that I've played. So when I put the game back on the shelf, take the game back off the shelf to play a new play scenario in an evening, I'll see where I'm up to in terms of the scenario book. But you can also use that contents page. No, generally speaking, the game's scenarios get bigger as you progress. And by bigger, I mean larger sections of the map, more counters. So, for example, if we look at scenario 15 that I've just randomly opened up, for the Americans, we've got multiple rifle counters, quite a few of those. They've all got lots of weapons, bazookas and MMGs. And we've got some Shermans, we've got a couple of Hellcats, Jackson later. And then for the German forces, we've got a couple of Hetzers, Jagdpanther, King Tiger, there we go. So yeah, again, just nicely laid out, very clear, a really large amount of content in terms of the scenarios for within the game. I have played them all multiple times now. I've had this game, I think my wife bought it for me for Christmas a few years ago now, and I've been through the scenario book multiple times. I would say that the scenarios, because of the nature of the game, it's American forces versus German forces. So every time you play, you're going to be playing the American forces versus German forces. That is the nature of the game. So yeah, large amount of content, great stuff, good value for money. I'll talk more about that in my sort of concluding thoughts, but certainly in terms of just the sheer number of scenarios, this is excellent. You also get, I'm just going to move around the camera here for a second. You also get this player's aid, which is excellent. This is a game, you're not using a huge amount of charts, I'll be honest. And I have quite a few games that do have a huge amount of charts, and I enjoy them. So, but this game you don't need too many. So this one player's aid will pretty much cover you for everything. By and large, you've got your terrain chart here, and we'll have a look at the map, talk about the terrain, off-board, artillery airstrikes, etc. And then we have our combat tables. And I'll talk more about combat. Combat is really quick to resolve, is one of the things I like about this game. And I'm not only combat from an infantry point of view, but also the vehicle combat is very quick to resolve. The vehicle combat in particular is quite decisive, I would say. And again, just really nicely laid out. When you've got the game on the table, you don't need a huge amount of charts in front of you. This one will pretty much cover you. So this is the map. It is massive. It's probably the single largest map I have in any of my wargame collection. I think it measures in at 30 by 41 inches. I can hardly fit it on the table to get it in the camera view. It is flaring a little bit from my lights, so it's actually a little bit more, it is more contrasted than it looks on the camera. And I'll zoom in a little bit just so we can have a look at the detail of the map. The map itself is absolutely beautiful, and we'll have a look at that in a second. As I said earlier, you are playing on a section of the map. So each scenario will tell you, so for it, I'm going to pick an example. You may be playing on, let me just use my hand, you may be playing like on this section here, which means you can put all your rule books and player aid on the other parts of the map that you're not using. And you get little counters to represent the sort of map edges, as it were. What I would say is, because the map's so large, you do need to have a table that will accommodate this size map. It's not and because it's mounted, it's not like you can just sort of fold it up and play on the bit. It just doesn't work that way. You need to be able to, at least the way I've played it, you lay the whole map out. It is very hard wearing. I have played, I don't know how many games of old school tactical on this map. A lot. It's very hard wearing. I would say, because it's large, it's also quite heavy. It's not heavy, but when you're laying it out, it pays to be a little bit careful, because it's such a large mounted map. And it is, just fold and so forth. But I found the map very hard wearing. So I'm going to zoom in and we'll have a look at some of the details. So as I said, the actual artwork of the map itself, in my opinion, is absolutely stunning. I love the maps that Shane creates for the game. There's so much detail. It's got a very consistent palette. It feels like it thematically feels right. And also, not only is it very appealing and pleasing to the eye, it's also very clear, the contents of the hexes from a gameplay point of view. And actually on the map itself, you can't see this off camera, there is an index which tells you, orchards or woodland or bocage, example, etc. So the map, I think, is stunning. I love the map in this series, and this is a particularly good one. A real pleasure to play on. So yeah, absolutely great work. Absolutely, yeah, it's lovely. Every time I this is one of those games where every time I lay it out, I put the counters on the map. I just sit there for a few minutes and go, this looks great. It looks great. And it helps when you're playing this game, whether either playing it on your own solo or playing with other players. Thematically, it feels, it just looks as you imagine this environment to be. So yeah, brilliant work on the map. I absolutely love it. So here we've got some counters and some cards. I'll talk about the counters first and what the cards do. So if we look at the Americans here, we've got a rifle unit, which is probably the most common unit that you'll be using for the Americans. We've also got some engineers. And the reason I want to show you the cards is what you get in the game is you get a card for every type of counter that there would be. So for example, this is the rifle squad. It shows you its movement, its firepower, range and defense. So the first number in the top left is firepower, then the range of that counter, then the defense, and then the movement. So for example, the engineer has a higher firepower, less range, can't move quite as fast. What I like about these cards, and the reason I brought them here, is they are a very good reference, quick reference for when you're playing the game. So for example, the rifle squads are very straightforward. The engineer squads, though, they get a +1 in melee, they can use flamethrowers, they can detect and remove mines, remove obstacles and use smoke. And they're just a really handy player aid to have in front of you. So when you've got your game set up, just go through the units that you've got and pick the relevant cards, put them to one side. And if you need that quick reference, that's what they do. You're not using them to play the game, they're simply a reference. The same with the leader. Again, so this is a game where you may have a stack of a couple of units, so a couple of rifles with a maybe an additional weapon. So for example, here we've got the Germans, we've got a LMG 42 and a HMG 34, and again you'll get cards for those as well. There's the heavy machine gun, the MG34 heavy machine gun, but you may end up with a stack with a couple of the units and a leader, and again you just have this card to hand just so you can remind you of all the abilities that the leader provides in the game. And it's just a brilliant quick reference, that's all. And I really, that has saved me huge amounts of time when playing the game. The counters themselves are nice and big and chunky. They don't need clipping. They punch out of the cardboard sections really nicely. The artwork is absolutely excellent. There's a great level of authentic detail. And I've cast my BDI over them, as you probably can imagine. And they are very, very nicely done. And again, very, very historically authentic. The same with the vehicles. So here's the M10 that we've been talking about in this video. And again, I've got my counter. Like I said, you orientate it within the hex. It has a nice little red section there to do that. The vehicle counters are a little bigger than the infantry counter. And again, you get the card to just as that reference for all the things. You will probably need these. I use these extensively, the vehicle cards anyway. Once you've played the game a few times, these are just a reference. But for the vehicles, I did use them quite a lot because it tells you the range of their gun, what you need to hit, and the APF, the armoured piercing firepower that you'll need as well. And plus, obviously the M10's open top. So they're the kind of main. What I've done here is laid out an example of each of the type of counters. There are many different, in fact I'll show you. Here I've got my bag full of the different German counters. I'm just going to put them on the board here. We've got Hetzers, Jagdpanzers, Wirbelwinds, we've got Panzer IVs, and so on and so on and so on. So you get a Brumbar, so you get a huge amount of vehicle counters for the game, for example, and the same with the infantry counters, and the same with the different weapons. So the Americans will have BARs, they'll have 30 cals, they'll have satchel charges, etc. So in terms of the amount of content, you get a lot, and you get a lot of the different counters to use in the scenarios. Armoured cars, self-propelled guns, tanks, tank destroyers, flak guns, etc. Plus anti-tank guns, so packs and so forth. And again, very consistent art style, very nicely done. Here's the Hetzer, one of my favourites. Just really easy to read counters. Like I said, they don't need clipping. They punch out really well. They are a really nice thick stock. I have played multiple games with these, and they show no signs of wear or tear or anything like that. So excellent production, print quality is excellent. Yeah, just huge volume of content for your money. Here's a couple of gameplay counters that you'll be using frequently. Units can be, I should say, when you flip a counter over, that's its reduced size, so it's very clear visual language between normal and reduced. You will be using some gameplay counters extensively through the game session. So for example, here we've got a shaken counter and then broken. They come as a result of combat for the most part. And you will use these counters here to tell you what you have done in that turn with that counter. So if you've moved it, you simply place, let's say you moved to there, you simply place the moved count section, and then when you fired, you can use the fired, and when it's completely used up and done all the things it could possibly do that you've chosen, you flip it to the used. You use these quite extensively. And again, very nicely done, very clear. There are multiple gameplay counters, so I'm just looking at the box over there, rubble, when things get immobilized, airstrikes, etc, etc, etc. So this is just a small selection, but just really just talk about the sort of the quality, the visual quality, the visual language, how easy they are to read. The production quality is excellent. There's no doubt about it in terms of the physical assets, the physical components, you get in the game. It is excellent. And when we have, for example, I can show you, because I've got the box open, these are all the Allied, American vehicle counters. These are all the German sort of weapon counters. So we've got flamethrowers, we've got LMGs, Panzerfausts, we've got grenade bundles, we've got Panzer Schrecks, for example. Here's one of the bags with all the different infantry types that you get. And again, all really nice, high quality. Again, the artwork is superb, absolutely superb. And then we've got the American leaders, for example. So as you can see, I try and be a little bit organised, best as I can. Doesn't come naturally to how I sort my games out. You could put them into trays if you wanted. You do get this bit of space in the box when everything's packed away. There is a bit of space in the box for all the components to fit. So if you want to use trays rather than little Ziploc bags like I use, you'd be entitled to do so. Now, when it comes back to the cards for a section, and again, I'll just show this. These are all the cards for all the different types of units that you get in the game. So everything. So mortars, for example, got its own card. In addition to those cards, you also have a deck of luck. There you go, put it in camera, might help Matt. Luck cards. Now these, I've used these, I've played the game with them, played the game without them. You don't have to use them if you don't want to. I have done, they give a little bit more of a certain element to the game. So for example, if I pull the top one over, this is an artillery strike. So in your turn, you'd be able to use one of these. It just gives another little element to the game. And there's a whole bunch of them. So for example, fortune favours the bold, so +1 die roll modifier to your initiative roll. Every turn you're going to roll for initiative to see who could go first. That is key die roll, so that's a good. So that can be a good card to use at the right time. And again, very nice artwork, very well laid out. It's not a card-driven game. It absolutely is not a card-driven game. These are simply used. It can be used to effect in your turn if you so wish. Is how I would describe it. And very nicely done they are too. So again, in terms of the physical components of the game, the counters, the rulebook, the map, it's excellent job, both in terms of the artwork, in terms of the layout, and in terms of the physical print production quality is absolutely excellent. So I'm going to talk a bit about the mechanics of the game, and I'll start with combat, everyone's favourite. It is one of the things I like about this game is how fluid and quick combat is to resolve. As we mentioned earlier, each counter, well, not every single counter, but the vast majority of counters will have a combat firepower value. You're going to compare that to the defense value of the opponent. I've used this very simple example because they're both the same number. So the American rifle unit has a firepower of 4, had a range of 6. The German one is exactly the same and has a defense of 4. So it's a 0 on the column here because there's no difference. You simply roll 2d6. You look at what you get on your column. If you get high numbers, let's say we get a double 6, destroyed. Simple as that. We've got casualty, so they may be reduced. They may get shaken, depending on what result you get there. Interestingly, when you get certain results, you have to make what's called a gut check roll. Each scenario will have a gut check roll. So let's say we have to do a gut check on these Germans. Each scenario will tell you what the gut check roll you need to perform is. Depending on that, depends if they become, for example, broken or not. And it varies between the two sides. And it varies. I've never actually checked to see if it actually varies between each scenario, but certainly between the two sides, it varies on a scenario basis. There are modifiers. So, for example, one of the things the infantry combat table does here really, 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 really well, and it's why it's the only player aid you really need, apart from, like I said, the cards that you use as reference. It tells you all the possible roll modifiers that you've got. So it'll tell you if you have an attached leader, you'll get a +1 to that die roll modifier. If you've got height advantage, a +1. Same goes if they're adjacent, you'll get a +1 to your firepower. So one is going to affect your firepower. So if they were close, your firepower would go up. But the second category is the die roll modifier, so it affects the dice roll that you get. And it's just a really simple, elegant, quick to resolve, core game mechanic of combat. And it just works brilliantly well. What I would do for someone new to the game, get yourself a couple of counters, familiarise yourself with the rules, put like a light machine gun and a leader, create a firepower team, so they're combining their firepower numbers. It just works. It just works so well as a key mechanic that I really, really enjoy it. The other mechanic I want to talk about is, and you think, oh great, that's really straightforward, so I'm just going to be moving and I'm going to be shooting all the time. Well, you are, but there's another mechanic called the impulse system. And what the impulse system does is every turn in the scenario, you will be rolling to see how many impulse points you have. So the German player may be rolling 2d6, the American player may be rolling 2d6 plus 3. That will give you a total of impulse points you can use that turn. Again, what it does, the first thing it does is it increases the difference between the two sides based on the scenario. So not only is where they set up, so the Germans may be setting up in a building, the Americans may be trying to assault that building, but the Americans may have more impulse points to spend. Well, you need impulse points to move and to fire. So you can't necessarily just move and fire everything. So you're going to have to make some quite, as the commander of your forces, some quite difficult choices. You use these counters here to help you. They're just an aid to help you, remind you what each counter's done. Well, the reason you need those is because if I move this squad to here, that costs me an impulse point. I have an impulse point tracker on the side of the map. You can't see, it's off camera. Let's say I've got 12 impulse points. Well, I've just used one and I move it. Now it's the German player to spend an impulse point. And the German player may decide to fire on that counter, for example, or whatever it happens to be what the German player wants to do. And they'll use an impulse point to do it. Now what I can also do is I can have a stack and they create a stack there, and they can all move, and they cost me 2 impulse points to do that. And it's the German's player to do so, and do whatever they want to do. So what you find when you're playing the game and learning the game is that individually all these mechanics are very straightforward. It's a very simple, elegant system, but combined, when it all comes together, and the same with and the same with adding vehicles in as well, it means you're really, really going to have to think very hard about the decisions you make. It is not the case, depending on the scenario, depending on where you are, that you can just do everything you'd want to do all in once and hammer your opponent. It's just not going to work that way. Adds that sort of chaotic feel to the battle and the scenario that I really, really enjoy. So I've just laid out some counters here. Hypothetically, this is not from a scenario, I've just made it up quickly to illustrate and talk about what I love about OST as a system and what I love about this game in the series. So as I've said many times, the physical components are great. The artwork on the counters, the artwork of the map, absolutely brilliant. They look stunning. It's very evocative of the period. It feels right. I can imagine it all in my mind's eye playing out. I've got here, for example, a Hetzer. I've got an M10. I love the fact that, and I'm in this German, let's put it up there. These guys have got an HMG. In fact, let's put one team inside this building here. I love the fact you get the reference cards for all the different types of weapon and vehicle. I love all that. Let's suppose the German player, there we go, got an artillery strike card that he can use, or that the German player can use against this advancing rifle squad moving way across that field. Love all that. Combat system, very straightforward, simply comparing the firepower against the defense of the opponent. Defense can be increased by what's in the hex, so if they're in the woods or bocage or in a building, for example. It's all illustrated very simply on the terrain chart player aid. The actual combat resolution, just comparing that firepower against the defense, very straightforward, very fluid, moves really quickly, feels authentic, the results. It is quite decisive, I would say. The morale system, that gut check system, gives that unpredictability. So even when you think you're going to break a unit, you're still going to roll to see if that actually happens. The way leaders work in the game. And I love the impulse system. Absolutely love the impulse system. What it means is that when I'm playing 2-player, and I've played this game extensively 2-player, played with people who don't normally play hex and counter war games, and it's I go, you go, I go, you go. And you're having to make decisions because you don't have enough impulse points. You don't know how many impulse points you're going to get, so you can plan somewhat for what you may think happen next turn, but you don't know who's going to get initiative. It really does a good job, a very straightforward and fluid job of reproducing that chaotic feel of a battle. The plans go out the window when the bullets start flying, and it does that really nicely. I love the vehicles. I love the amount of vehicles you get, the amount of content you get, the different types of units, all the different weapons. It is a tactical World War II hex and counter game at its heart. And it is a brilliant example of a tactical World War II hex counter game. It does everything that I want from a tactical game set in this period. There's not been one case where I've come across a mechanic and gone, what? Why have they done it that way? That makes no sense to me. I can't think of a tactical World War II game that I haven't played. I'm sure there probably are some, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. And I know what I want from this sort of level of game. And it's different. This is a different game to other tactical games. It's got a different flavour. It's got different mechanics. But it just flows really, really beautifully and looks amazing. The final thing I would like to say is, again, just value for money. You get a huge amount of content. You get a huge number of counters, a huge number of scenarios. Everything is just superb quality. The printing, the finish, the layout, the artwork is absolutely excellent. I definitely felt, like I said, my wife bought me this for Christmas a few years ago. I've just played this a huge amount, and really feel that I've got that really great value for money from this big box product. And it's a joy to play and joy to lay out. So yeah, high recommendation for me. I would say, when I talked about playing solo, the impulse system lends itself very well to playing solo. You would be playing both sides to the best of their abilities. So for example, I think, okay, let's say I've got an objective to take this building here. So I'm making advances on the building, but then these Germans are pushing in from this side. This is all made up because I've just made this up on the fly. What I would be doing as the American player, I'd be thinking, okay, I'm going to spend my impulse points to move into a better position here. Now as the German player, okay, it's my go to spend the impulse points. Well, what are the Germans going to do to react to that? Are they going to lay down some LMG fire here to stop this unit moving across these fields? Or are they going to try and take out the M10 down the bottom here with the Hetzer? What's the best choice for those? Or are they going to try and bring up some defences to engage with this rifle squad, move them and engage them across there? The impulse system and the ease of the mechanics lend themselves very well to playing two-handed solo. There's no bot. It's not like you're playing against AI. If you enjoy playing games like that, and I do, I think this lends itself very, very well to that because of the impulse system, how quick it is between each of the two players or the two sides to do something and move something or fire something. It lends itself, and it's very engaging and very, you feel like something's always happening. So if like me, I play these games solo to get a strong narrative. I'm looking for a story when I play. Story of the action, story of unexpected events, which comes through the die rolls, through the impulse system, through the initiative, through the gut check, mechanics and so forth. And it has all that in spades. So if you're looking for a World War II game, tactical level game to play solo, I think this is a great option because it has all those in spades. So regardless if you're playing it solo or two-player or both, I think it's a brilliant example of what makes a great World War II tactical level game. Highly recommended. There are more games in the series. So this is game 2. There's also an Eastern Front game, and there's the Pacific game, and there are expansions for all those as well. So it's a game system you can really get your teeth into and expand as your collection expands, as you want to play more and more different theatres and different scenarios. So as you can tell, I've had this game for a couple of years now, and I played it recently. I thought, I really should do a review and share with people how much I love about OST, because I sometimes think that it's a game system that sort of can skirt under people's radar. So yeah, highly recommended. Thoroughly, even just getting these counters out and going through the mechanics just reminds me how much I have enjoyed playing this game. I have done a couple of AARs on the game, so if you're interested to how actually the scenarios play out and some more thoughts on the mechanics, please check those out as well. And yeah, thanks for watching as ever. Thank you.